Hey, welcome back to Business 101, Introduction to Business, and we are continuing now in our series on global business. This is now lecture number 5, and we're talking about the topic of competitive advantage. When we talk about competitive advantage is a concept, that seeks to try to answer the question, why is it that some countries excel in some sorts of activities in the marketplace, but perhaps not in others? Why is it that some countries are very strong and known for producing certain products or services? And why is it that other countries specialize and excel in other sorts of products and services? Who decides that? What determines those kinds of things? Does someone make that decision for them? Or does it just sort of naturally happen? And if so, how does that happen? Those are the kinds of questions we're going to try to answer because, quite frankly, when you look out at the landscape of global business, it's immediately obvious that some countries and some regions in the world excel in some things, and other regions or nations in other parts of the world excel in others. And so if we understand that, we can better understand how do countries bring something of value to the international global marketplace. So from here, a couple of concepts right at the beginning that the textbook wants to introduce to us. You can see there, competitive advantage between nations. And we're really talking about at least two different but related concepts. You see them there. The first concept is the whole concept or idea of absolute advantage, and the second is comparative advantage. Absolute advantage is really trying to describe the situation, as you see there, the description, the ability to produce something more efficiently than any other country can. And that, of course, is suggested by the term absolute. You have an absolute advantage over any other country to produce a particular product or service. Comparative advantage is a little bit of a more complex concept. The ability to produce some products more efficiently than other products compared within your own nation. Let's see if we can talk about that in a later slide. But first, let's deal with the concept of absolute advantage. The ability to produce something more efficiently than any other country can. Well, let me give you a rather obvious example in this next slide. This is one of the very large oil fields in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has an absolute advantage in producing oil than any other country around the world. Why is that? Well, it's pretty obvious, because they got more oil under the ground than most countries. They were gifted with natural reserves, a wealth of oil reserves under their ground, in a way that many countries around the world simply don't enjoy. And therefore, it's easier for them to drill and produce oil than other countries that don't have oil in the ground underneath them. That would be rather obvious. And that's really what we're talking about with absolute advantage. They have an ability to produce and bring to market a product more efficiently, more cost effectively than other nations. In this particular case, because they have an absolute gifted natural resource that other countries don't have. So in this particular example, when you begin to think of the implications of this in international trade, what is it that will primarily lift Saudi Arabia out of, poverty or economic challenges and those kinds of things on behalf of its nation and people? Well, obviously, sell oil, because you can produce oil more efficiently, more cost effectively than any other country, and therefore, when you bring oil to the international global marketplace, you're able to do it at a cost that beats anybody else, which means you make more profit. You do it better than anyone else. It's an absolute advantage. I hope that makes sense. That should be a rather straightforward concept. Now, as I mentioned before, the more complex topic is comparative advantage. And here, let's talk about the United States. Let's simply restrict our discussion to what are the possible things that the United States could produce. Because let's be quite honest, we produce many, many different things here in the United States. Two of the things we excel at producing, as you can see here, farming. For generations, of course, the United States has excelled at agricultural production, and more recently in software development, software production, right? We have, of course, right here in Northern California, probably the healthiest startup technological ecosystem in the entire world. It's what we call Silicon Valley, the birthplace of the world's major tech companies that dominate the landscape of technology throughout the world. Now, we do software development, well, you could say almost that we have something close to an absolute advantage. However, again, when you talk about the concept of comparative advantage, the first thing to remember, we're only talking about choices within the United States. Let me see if I can give you a sort of a theoretical construct to consider. We could, if we had some vacant land somewhere in the United States, we could decide, well, let's see, why don't we take that land and convert it into coffee production? We're going to turn it into a coffee plantation. Okay, we're going to, take down all of the weeds, and we're going to plow the ground, and we're going to use it for farming, but we're going to farm for coffee. Now, I should tell you, knowing a little bit about coffee farming and coffee production, the United States really doesn't have the climate to grow coffee very effectively or efficiently. But let's say we're stubborn. Damn it, we're just going to make coffee, okay? Or we're going to grow pineapples. I don't care if whether this land is really up in the wintry areas of Minnesota, we're going to grow pineapples and coffee, okay? We could do that, or we could instead decide to use that resource, that land, to build a facility, an enormous facility to excel in software development. And the question is, simply in the decisions between A and B in the United States, which would be more effective for us, more efficient for us, to make software or to grow coffee and pineapples? And of course, in that particular example, the answer is obvious. Comparatively speaking, we produce more effectively when you consider software development than growing coffee, or quite frankly, pineapples in Minnesota. Now, that's not to say we don't grow things well. We have an enormous amount of land in the Midwest, which is dedicated to corn production, as you see there in the upper slide there. And if you've ever driven from California, say, to the Midwest, I have a couple of times. I've driven to Kansas City, I've driven to Chicago, and when you drive through states like Kansas and states like Missouri, you see just miles and miles of corn production. We're very well suited for that kind of particular crop farming. And therefore, it's a better use of our resources comparatively than to many things that, well, we produce here, we just don't produce them as efficiently. Therefore, the argument is, despite the fact that we can grow all kinds of things and produce all kinds of things in the United States, the concept of comparative advantage suggests we should focus on those things, those products and services, where we are the most efficient. Two examples would be corn farming and software development. And the things that we're perhaps not so efficient at doing, like growing coffee, well, when we have large coffee needs in the nation, we should pretty much focus on importing the coffee rather than trying to grow it inefficiently here in the United States, which of course is indeed exactly what we do. Now, I hope that makes sense, because really, even though it appears on that first slide of this deck on the same slide, you can see the idea of absolute advantage and comparative advantage are really two very significantly different concepts. Absolute advantage has to do with how do we rate in producing a good product or service compared to other nations. That's what absolute advantage is all about. Whereas comparative advantage is considering all the things we could produce within our one nation, what do we produce the most efficiently, and therefore is it possible for us to simply trade international trade imports and exports for the rest of it? And that's really the concept of comparative advantage within the purview of international business. Now, There's one last thing in the slide deck to consider when we talk about the concept of different ways of considering competitive advantage, and that is the idea of national competitive advantage. You see the description there. National competitive advantage suggests that a country may have, or a region may have, competitive advantage in the international marketplace, which stems from a whole combination of factor conditions, demand conditions, related and supporting industries, firm strategy, structures, and rivalries. Well, that's a word salad, right? That's a mouthful. So let's see if we can illustrate this. I can think of one nation which clearly has a competitive advantage in a particular product class over any other nation in the world. And that's if we're talking about luxury automobiles and German auto manufacturing. German auto manufacturing is renowned for, well, generations for companies like Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Audi, Volkswagen, Porsche. There's all sorts of very, very well-known, renowned, respected automobile brands in the luxury space that are all based in Germany. You see here the picture of Mercedes auto manufacturing. Why is it that the Germans have excelled in the manufacturing of luxury automobiles and very much dominate the luxury auto space? Now, of course, is Germany the only place that quality luxury automobiles are made? Of course not. We still have automobiles like Ferrari and like Rolls-Royce. You might even consider Lexus somewhere in that mix as well, right? And so there are other countries around the world that also produce quality luxury automobiles, but there really isn't another place on earth like Germany where so many of these luxury brands for generations respected by automobile enthusiasts and car owners, all based in one country. And the key to understanding this is the description that was given in the previous slide. So I'm going to go back there. You can see here, national competitive advantage stems from several different things. Factor conditions, demand conditions, related and supporting industries, firm strategy, structures, and rivalries. So let's talk about that. Well, you know that they're all based in the same country, and therefore they're very close to one another. And that means if you're looking for employment to start your career in luxury automobiles, you have many choices, all within the similar region. So if you are a German engineer and you major in auto manufacturing and you're good at it, then you could find a job at several different companies by just simply turning left or right on a particular street and going into a different driveway. That helps because it brings a concentration of qualified employees. It also stems from the fact, you may know, Germany has this thing, a freeway system known as the Autobahn. The Autobahn has no speed limit. You can drive as fast as you safely are able to do so. Now, it also means in Germany, for years and years and years, getting a driver's license in Germany is far more difficult than any place else in the world. Clearly, significantly more difficult to get a driver's license in Germany than, of course, here in the United States. And that means that the combination of very qualified drivers and a freeway system where, at least in some parts, you have no top-end speed limit means the demand for very safe automobiles that can drive comfortably at very high speeds, well, there is greater demand for that than any place else in the Western world. So demand conditions, factor conditions, in this case factors, I was talking about qualified employees, right? All of them are focused in a certain geographical area, which draws related and supporting industries to that area, like automobile electronics, like tire manufacturers, like, you get the point, right? And that means that in the marketplace, you have several very high quality, worthy competitors all competing for the same marketplace, and that kind of competition drives up performance of the company. The company has to be at the top of their game just to grab a little bit of market share, and therefore there are no weaklings in that industry, if that makes sense. As a result, because of national competitive advantage, what develops over time is a level of quality and expertise and superiority that then translates in the international marketplace to saying, well, even the second or third best German auto manufacturer is head and shoulders above any other country's auto manufacturing, because they have to compete harder in their own domestic market just to stay alive. That creates a competitive advantage, that fierce competition, when these companies decide they're going to start selling overseas. Their products are better, they're more well thought out, they can deal with more different sets of changes in different international marketplaces. It breeds competitive advantage for the entire national region for that product class in the international market. Well, there you have it. You have a couple of different ways to look at competitive advantage in international business. You have absolute advantage, you have comparative advantage, and finally you have regional or national competitive advantage. All of these kinds of things are things we consider when we look at how do companies from a certain nation strategize and plan to successfully enter international marketplaces in other countries. What do they bring to the table? What's their strongest suit? What do they do best? How are they different and better than other competitors in the marketplace? These are three things to consider then: absolute advantage, comparative advantage, and national competitive advantage. More detail on this, of course, in the textbook. Study that hard. I hope that's helpful. We'll see you in the next lecture.